Carol, thank you for your emails.
Diego just came in. You can let him in as a panelist.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Diego. How are you?
Doing well.
Bruce, are you also a co-host?
Yes.
No, Bruce needs to be I'll make him a co-host right now when he came back.
Thank you.
All right, you guys are on YouTube Live, so you're now YouTube stars. I'll check on my
Community
mic.
Police Review Commission. Look at that.
Visa just came on. Somebody can let her in.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, we are recording on Zoom and then YouTube.
Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3. We have 4 commissioners. Is that a quorum?
Yes, I think that we have the floating quorum going on. There's only 7 active members. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to give our other colleagues a couple more minutes and then we'll start the meeting. Good evening, Chief. How you doing?
I am tired. City Council went till midnight last night.
Yeah, I know. I was there in spirit.
Yeah.
Oscar's on, if someone wants to let him in.
Thank you. Sorry for being 2 minutes late.
You have to bring the donuts next time.
I work.
All right, Shawnee, are you ready to go? You're muted and your camera's off.
Yes, I am ready if you are ready.
Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is the July 1st, 2020 meeting of the Community Police Review Commission of the City of Richmond. It is 7:02 p.m. And we will begin. What do I do with my agenda? We will begin with the roll call. Madam Administrative Person, would you call the roll? What's your title?
Staff liaison.
Staff Liaison, thank you. Would you call the roll?
Chair David Brown.
I'm here.
Vice Chair Yenny Garcia is absent. Commissioner Diego Garcia.
Here.
Commissioner Oscar Garcia.
Here.
Commissioner Carol Hegstrom. Commissioner Randy Joseph.
I'm here.
Commissioner Stephen Lacey is not here. That concludes the roll.
Okay, and we should note that there are 2 vacancies on the Community Police Review Commission. There was 1 vacancy for some time. Former Commissioner Portia Brown Walton, her seat was deemed to be vacant because of her extended absences. Yenny, let the record reflect that Vice Chair Yenny Garcia is joining the meeting. And if you'll join me, please, in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. We have a closed session tonight, so just prior to our closed session, we will have open forum before closed session. There will be another opportunity for public forum, so don't feel compelled to have to make your statement right now. You can wait for the second round of public forum. Also, our staff liaison asks that if anybody would like to speak on any of the matters that are on the agenda or the public forum, please send an email. There's a speaker card, but I don't know that we have it in email form. But if you send an email to cprc@ci.richmond.ca.us and put in the subject line the agenda item you wish to speak on, and just a short note that says that you wish to speak on it, that I believe will be deemed sufficient compliance with our rules, as long as that email is received prior to the calling of the item. Was that adequate, Shawnee?
Yes.
Is there any open forum before closed session? Okay, doesn't appear that there is. Sorry?
There are none.
Okay. Commissioners, do you all have the link to the closed session? Shawnee sent it out today. She sent it out, I think, a day or so ago as well. And so at this time, in order to go to the closed session, you will leave this meeting by mashing the leave button, and then you'll click on the link for the closed session. Does everybody understand? Are there any questions? Hearing no response, I'll see y'all at the,
What,
Some-
second?
yeah.
Somebody should,
I just want to let the record reflect that Stephen Lacy, Commissioner Lacy, has joined. And then also just to let the attendees know that when you leave and you guys go to closed session, you will be returning back. So for the attendees, they just need to monitor the site and wait for you guys to return.
Okay, and people like Chief French and Ben Terrio and yourself, you'll stay in the public session, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know where, oh, there's Bruce Soublé. Okay, so if you will all excuse me and join me in the executive session, I'll see you there.
To the people watching as attendees of this meeting, we will be muting your microphones at this point.
So many Zoom meetings, huh, Randy?
So many Zoom meetings. This is my fourth one today. And this is the longest one.
Uh,
We're also live on YouTube.
oh, wow, you're fancy.
Yeah.
Is everyone back in?
I don't see David yet.
Yeah, I don't see him in the attendees list either.
He's in the attendees. And he's gone.
Okay, I think I'm back. And are we all here? Okay, so this is going to be a report of final action taken in the executive session. As to complaint 2019-5, the commission voted unanimously to send this investigation back to the investigator to get some questions answered that we had. With respect to 2020-2, the appeal, the commission voted to accept the investigator's report, and the commission voted a finding that the complaint in this case is not within the jurisdiction of the CPRC. It does not allege a complaint against a Richmond police officer. And so that, as to that matter, that's final. Okay, let's keep moving down the agenda. We have minutes. Let's see. I don't recall seeing the June minutes, Shawnee.
June minutes are not available, only May.
Okay, that's why I don't recall seeing them. The May minutes have been circulated. Are there questions or comments on the May minutes? If there are none, is there a motion to approve the May minutes?
Motion to
Hello?
approve the May minutes.
Okay, Commissioner Joseph moves. Is there a second?
Stephen Lacy, I'll second.
All right, so we have a motion to approve, seconded. Any other discussion? If there's no further discussion, please call the roll for the approval of the May minutes.
Commissioner or Chair Brown,
Aye.
Commissioner or Vice Chair, I'm sorry, Yanni Garcia,
Aye.
Commissioner Diego Garcia,
You're muted, Diego.
Here.
Is that
Commissioner,
an aye to approve the minutes?
Yes.
Thank you.
Commissioner Oscar Garcia,
Aye.
Commissioner Hedstrom,
I abstained because I didn't see the minutes and haven't read them.
okay, Commissioner Randy Joseph,
Aye.
and Commissioner Stephen Lacy.
Aye.
Okay, the next item is the agenda review. Under new business number 9, item B is duplicated. Item 11, item B is duplicated in item 10, old business. So we will take that out of the new business and just consider A and C. Any other questions about the agenda? Hearing no response, we will move on to the public forum.
Okay, so I have comments to read into the public record, and then there's also someone who I believe is going to be speaking here on the live webinar. So I'll start with the comments that I'm going to read in. The first one is from Cordell Hindler. His comment says, number 1, the mayor did mention about the Community Police Commission, and he will try to get those vacancies before the council meeting in September. For the next agenda, he would like to see Commissioners Joseph and Lacy regarding how to engage youth and police relations. The next comment is from Margot Cunningham. It says, dear members of the Community Police Review Commission, please accept these comments on agenda item. And actually, I'm sorry, this is for an agenda item. So I will read that during that agenda item. Open forum. We have John, and I believe John would be on here. John Henry Evans, I'm going to allow him to speak. Give me just a second here. Okay, John, you have to unmute yourself and you can speak now. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Members of the commission, I don't have a whole lot to add in here. The only thing that I want to make clear is that I have reviewed the agenda and seen the cases brought up by Dejan Brown and Jonathan Spranigan, and I just want to make sure that before this meeting is over, it's made clear to the public what the police are already doing and already planning to do in regards to these cases, because I think it's a matter of concern for myself and I imagine a lot of other citizens as well. And that's it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is that it, Shawnee?
That's it.
Okay. We turn to Mr. Myrick. Is he here?
He is not on the call. I'm looking
All right.
now to see if he's part of the attendee, and I do not see him.
All right, let's move on then to Chief French.
Good evening, everyone.
Hello.
Commissioner. Hi, so the, I'm sure you all know that the most difficult thing that we in the city have been dealing with is the budget. And if you've been following any of the city council meetings, you're aware of kind of where we've gone with the budget. So I just want to give a little bit of update as to where we are in the police department with the cuts that have been made. So thus far with the budget, and a budget was passed last night, we've already reduced our police force by probably a little over 10%. That's due mainly to positions that were cut. We've had 33 positions within the police department that were frozen for the next fiscal year, 20 of them being sworn police officer positions from the rank of captain, lieutenant, sergeant, and officer. So that's going to have a significant impact on how we proceed with our policing model. We're not going to be able to provide the level of service that we've had over the last 10 plus years with the amount of staffing we have. that leaves us with about 150 police officers. Just, several years ago, we had 200 police officers, or 198 at our high point. We now have 150, and out of that 150, we have another about 15 or 16 officers that are off on injury leave. So that brings us down to the 130s. And so we've had to, I talked earlier this year about restructuring the police department and how we've had to collapse several units. We had hoped that once we brought our staffing levels up that we would restaff those units, but that's not going to be possible moving forward. So some of the impacts are, for example, we get hundreds of fireworks complaints every single night. And we used to have a team, our foot and bike patrol used to focus on the fireworks during this time and strictly go out and look for fireworks and enforce the fireworks and confiscate fireworks. We no longer have our foot and bike patrol team to do that. So our beat officers, the 9 beat officers that are taking care of the city and responding for calls for service, have to try to locate the fireworks in between calls. And that's very difficult to do. So we haven't confiscated that many fireworks over this last year. Over the last couple months. Other impacts are long-term community problems that these units used to deal with, like drug houses or the prostitution problem on 23rd Street. These are problems that are more difficult for beat officers to solve because they're going to different calls. And so some of that takes directed enforcement and directed patrol. And those things can no longer happen with the staffing model that we have. We have to try to figure out how we're going to address those things moving forward. So we're having those conversations internally in the department. Additionally, we have less investigators. So some of the things that we've been investigating, like when you have something stolen, we try to find the person that did that. Some of these things aren't going to be able to be investigated moving forward. We'll continue to take the report, and a lot of these reports will be done online, but we just don't have the capacity to respond to a lot of these issues anymore in person because of staffing. Additionally, overtime budget has been cut. So a lot of these things were also done on overtime, and with not having the overtime to do these things, we won't be able to use that method to solve some of these problems. The other units that were cut, I talked about before, we had cut our CCTV program, we had revamped it, and we were going to move forward with hiring civilians to staff our CCTV room. Those positions have been cut. And so while the CCTV will continue to record, they just won't be staffed on a continual basis. Our community policing model is going to have to change, and last night the council directed staff to look at our community policing model and see how we move forward with the amount of staffing that we have. But community policing, as we've known it in the Richmond Police Department for the last 10 plus years, is no longer. And unfortunately, this was the 21st century model. This was what President Obama's task force has put in place as a model of community policing. But we are going to have to move away from that because we just don't have the ability to do a lot of the community events. Many of you know we used to be at every single community event. That's not going to be any longer. The community meetings, we used to go to all neighborhood council meetings. We're not going to be able to do that either. So those are some of the impacts of the budget thus far. I know that there is still a push to defund the police department. Additionally, I think the issue that we have right now is that this push to defund for 20% of the police department, well, we're already halfway there, yet what the community is actually calling for is that the funding go to services, which I agree, services need funding and additional resources to be able to mitigate some of these things before they become police issues. But in this case, the 10+% that's already been defunded from the police department is not going to services. It's going to bridge the budget gap that the city of Richmond has. So we're left in the same position where we are defunding the police department, but we are not staffing those resources in a way that they need to be staffed. So we're going to have some issues there. Moving on, for the month of June, we actually had 3 homicides. We had only had 1 previous homicide this year, and that homicide happened in April. Prior to that, we hadn't had a homicide since October. So we had on the 1st of June, we had a 90-year-old woman that was killed in her home by her grandson. And I talked a little bit about that at the last meeting. That was a very difficult case that some of our officers are still struggling with. Then we had on the 14th of June, a 37-year-old Miss Norby, and I can't pronounce her last name, but she was an unhoused person living in a homeless encampment along Carlson Boulevard, and she was killed, and we've now offered a reward in that case, a $10,000 reward, because we've exhausted some of our the leads that we had, and so we're hoping somebody from the community will come forward with some information. Our 3rd homicide of last month was a 55-year-old that was also killed in a home, and we do have somebody in custody and charged with that homicide. Additionally, we've been struggling with shootings over the last month. There seems to be an uptick in gang activity between Norteño and Sereno gangs in the lower McDonald area around First Street. We've had numerous shootings in that area. And so beat officers are trying to provide extra patrol when they are available. Let's see. So I'll go back to, I spoke a little bit about fireworks and the challenges that we've had with fireworks over the last few months. So fireworks have been a problem for our community, as with a lot of communities across the nation this season. Normally we start getting complaints about fireworks in June. This year we've started getting them around April, and we've had literally thousands of complaints of fireworks. Last week, we put together a webinar in which we invited our neighboring cities, San Pablo and El Cerrito, to join us, and the fire department to talk to the community about the challenges that we have around fireworks. And it had a good response. We had over 200 people on that. And I think from that, people understood what the challenges are for us to address the fireworks issue. I know it's really difficult, especially for people with PTSD, children. My own son came running into my room the other day because there were some fireworks going off in our neighborhood, and he thought they were gunshots, and we had to explain to him that they were fireworks, not gunshots. But I'm struggling with the same challenge that many of the callers that we have to our communication center are struggling with. We did redirect our special investigations team over the last 2 weeks to focus on fireworks. So took them off of their assignments. We have them working in patrol capacity, trying to address the fireworks issue, because we know it's such a huge issue within our community. Additionally, in June, we had 10 officers that were injured. Luckily, none of them are off on long-term injury. There was one that was off for a few days. The other ones just submitted injury paperwork. Additionally, like I said before, we have 12 officers off on injury leave and another 3 officers that are on modified duty. So that's officers that aren't able to work in a patrol capacity. And that's what I have.
Questions for Chief French? I'm not seeing any hands raised.
There's several hands raised.
Oscar Garcia. Unmute yourself. There you go.
Yeah, it took me a second to find the unmute. Thank you, Chief. I wanted to start off by thanking you again for attending probably several. I attended 2 Black Lives Matter peaceful protests in Richmond. And in one, the one that was mainly at Nicholas Park that I went to, something that you stated resonated, and I wanted to share that with the rest of the commissioners who weren't there, that you can take your uniform off, and essentially no one will know that you're an officer. However, the color of your skin, you will always live with that, or you always live with that. And that really resonated. Just from my personal experience, I experienced similar things as well. So I just wanted to share that with everyone. And I've actually shared it with colleagues at work, because it is something that goes back to how African Americans are treated in the US. And I think we're pretty lucky in Richmond to have an Latina African American as chief. So just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Other questions or comments? Diego Garcia.
Yes. Thank you, Chief, for that report. It's sad to hear what's going on with the community policing. Let me ask you a question. What's the process, or is it feasible to have any officers who would like to volunteer instead of getting paid to participate in any of the events or projects that are in the community?
So we do, I'm sorry, turn the light off. So we do have several officers who have volunteered their time. I actually volunteer my time every single weekend. And last weekend we had several officers volunteer their time to do the Juneteenth parade. We have officers that volunteer throughout the year, but you have to understand also that they work 12-hour days and commute home. And so it's really difficult that the 3 days that they get off, that they're driving in to attend events and stuff like that. I mean, we get burnt out too. You know, the officers do volunteer. They understand how important it is. One of the things I'm actually looking at for our orientation period moving forward for new officers is to integrate them into the community a little bit better and have them actually volunteer at some of our volunteer with different organizations, like maybe at GRIP for a day, maybe, you know, going to Rise and talking to kids all out of uniform before they put this gun on, or before, you know, they're in the uniform, they go out and they really integrate with the community. So those are some of the things that I'm looking at moving forward. But yes, our officers do volunteer their time.
Perfect, thank you.
Other questions for Chief French? Randy.
Carol's before me.
Oh,
Thank you, Randy.
Carol and Yenny.
Okay.
So I had a question regarding overtime, because it seems to me that I don't know what happened at the city council, and I imagine that a lot of overtime is going to get cut, but I also think it's really important that officers do get a chance to get a good night's sleep and do have time to refresh themselves and come back to work having had a good sleep. And so do you have any comments about overtime? What's the plan right now regarding overtime?
So there's many reasons why we use overtime. I can name some. We have some grants that require overtime. So one grant in particular is a DUI grant that we have that has officers going out there specifically to focus on DUI saturation and arrest and stuff like that. So there's a reason, one of the instances in which we use overtime, but that's all reimbursable. So let me back up. So every year there's overtime that's built into the budget. There's no way that the police department can go without using any overtime, because every time an officer goes to court, unless they're on duty, it's overtime. If they have to stay over their shift because they're on a detail, let's say that there was a rape and we have to take the victim to the hospital and sit there for several hours and then interview her. I mean, that's all a process. And normally those investigations take several hours before they're even able to be taken over by an actual detective. So there's sometimes when we can't leave our shift without writing the report and continuing with the investigation. So that's overtime. Some of the mutual aid response, when our officers were going to different areas, not just for riots or protests, but we were responding to Santa Rosa for the fires and other areas, that's normally done on overtime. However, that's reimbursable. What I'm not sure that council has understood yet, is that the overtime that we get, there's a set amount, and yes, we always go over that amount, but a lot of the, some of it is actually reimbursable, and that doesn't go back into the overtime bucket. So it looks like we're overspending, but a lot of it's coming back to the department and it's not going to show. So now we're trying to figure out a way internally that we can actually track that amount, so that when they say, well, you've gone over your budget by 1.2 million, I could show that we were reimbursed 1.2 million or however the amount is. But some of the other things, homicides, for instance, the young lady that was killed on a Sunday, investigators have to come in, and we know from TV shows that the first 48 hours after a homicide are the most important. So they're coming in, they're working, they work to exhaust all leads. And so that's normally done on overtime. A lot of overtime has been spent on illegal marijuana grows. Patrol, we'll get a burglary at a house or something. We go in the house and it turns out to be an illegal marijuana grow. We have to call out a unit to come and collect all the plants and put them into evidence. And we can't just wait until they're on duty. What happens if it's a Saturday, they don't come back till Monday? We can't just leave the plants there. We can't just leave the house open. So that's done on overtime. All of the events that go on I won't say all, but a lot of the events that go on in the city, like there's organizers that throw parties and concerts at the Richmond Auditorium or at the Craneway. They're all required to have security and police officers there. And so that's done on overtime. However, that's reimbursed by whatever company's throwing that event. We have several other contracts like that. Kaiser at one point was reimbursing us for doing overtime in their emergency room because they wanted an officer there, but they were reimbursing the department, as well as Hilltop. There are different Hilltop Mall and the area surrounding Hilltop Mall. They contracted with us for officers to be there on overtime to solely focus on those areas because they were having a lot of car break-ins and stuff like that. And they know that those things, the beat officer has other things that they have to handle. So these officers were strictly dedicated to that, but we are reimbursed by those companies for that. So lots of reasons why we use overtime. It's something that can never go away. What I did this year though, in structuring and breaking down some of the other teams so that we could fully staff patrol, was that I made it so our minimum staffing is 9 beats. My goal is to staff every patrol team with at least 12 officers, not 9, because at any given time, 2 officers could be off on vacation. And if we have a sick call, that's a third. So if we know that minimum staffing is 9 and that 3 people might be off at any given time, then that we will still have minimum staffing without having to fill that on overtime. So that's been the goal. But of course, it's a challenge now that we don't have as many positions.
Other questions for Chief French? Yenny, unmute yourself, please.
Hi, Chief. I have 2 questions. But before my questions, I do want to say something to you. I just want to thank you for being so, I don't even know if the word brave really sums up who you are, because I know that there's a lot of pressure on both sides for you, from the community and from police officers. And I can only imagine the amount of stress that this may cause a normal person. And so I want to just thank you for the way that you're handling this with so much grace and really being supportive to both sides and being just being awesome. So I really want to just thank you for that before I continue. My first question was, when it was considered to reduce certain positions, like who was in charge of deciding that, and how did the decision come about to do, like, not responding to fireworks, the stolen items, and everything that was cut?
So the positions, the actual positions that were frozen, I made some recommendations, and then council made the ultimate decision on which positions they were going to freeze. In terms of what we're going to respond to and what we're not, those conversations are still being had. I'm having those conversations with my boss, the city manager. We are going to include the community in some of those conversations. And I'm also having those with the Police Officers Association and our staff internally. We just want to see what makes sense. So we're gathering data and also trying to balance the needs of the community. So those things that we are and we're not going to respond to, those things are still being discussed. I was just kind of giving you some examples on what might have to go.
Okay. When you talked about the stolen items or like not coming to these calls, are you talking about like if a car gets stolen? Those type of calls, or just petty stuff that, you know, my purse got stolen from the car and it's gone?
Yeah, no, we have to respond if a vehicle is stolen because we have to submit a report into the computer system, but it might be that it takes a while longer for us to respond. For instance, in Oakland, sometimes it might take an officer a few days to respond, even if your house is broken into. I hope we don't get to that point. But some other cities that are you know, understaffed have that issue. One of our officers lives in Oakland. I was just talking to him the other day and he said there was a stolen car parked in front of his house for over a week and he kept calling every day and they're like, we'll get to it when we get to it. So I'm hoping that that's not where we're going here. But with the limited staffing, we really have to see and be available for those emergency calls for service.
Okay, I have a question regarding the fireworks, and I don't know if you'll have the answer to this or not, but right now, obviously they're crazy right now, but with the amount of calls that officers respond to as far as fireworks, like what's the percentage of actually people getting arrested or cited for these? Because I can only imagine that very little, if at all, because people...
At this point, I think we've issued maybe one citation. We have confiscated a few fireworks from different locations, but I think we've only issued one citation this year. As you can imagine, they go off, people call us. By the time we get there, there's nobody there. We might find, you know, evidence of fireworks in the street, but we don't know who they belong to or what house. And even if somebody gives us an address, we could go knock on the door, but misdemeanor fireworks, I mean, possession of fireworks is a misdemeanor at best. And so we can't, you know, write a search warrant to go in somebody's house to confiscate them, nor is that what the community probably wants us to do. So it's a challenge.
So I wasn't at the Zoom, not the webinar last time, so I don't know if this was answered there or not. So, or if it was addressed. Is it safe then to say that people shouldn't even be calling 911 to report this? Because I mean, what are the chances that something's gonna even be done?
So we're asking people that actually see somebody doing fireworks, not that they just hear them, but if they see somebody doing fireworks, they could give us a description. So at least when we respond, we can know what we're looking for. Then we are asking people to call us. At least if somebody is seeing somebody, we have an actual location that we can go to, as opposed to, well, I hear fireworks. Well, we all hear fireworks. They're going off everywhere. This is not a Richmond issue. This is a nationwide issue. And I know it's worse in some particular areas, but this is a challenge across the nation, really.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, Randy? Let's see. Carol, did we get to you? Carol Hagstrom?
Yeah, I already
Okay,
asked my
you're not
question.
waving your hand. Okay, Randy Joseph.
Hello. My question, I have
Yeah,
a couple questions.
Go ahead.
Okay. I have a couple questions. So one, you're saying you're moving from a community policing model. What are we moving into?
That I don't know yet. I mean, I hope we stay in a community policing model, but community policing, how we've known it over the last 10 years is changing. You know, we still want to be able to connect with the community, of course, but even on the agenda, on last night's agenda, it said move from a community policing model to something more conducive with the amount of staffing we have. I don't know what the exact wording was, but that's what's on there.
Are you working with people in the community to adjust to see where that adjustments can see fit and seeing where that model could maybe shift, or is that something that's just happening internally?
No, we're going to be working with the community on that. That was my direction from the council last night, is to work with different community members. I'm not sure how that's going to work at this point yet. I'll be meeting with the city manager, and she's going to be getting additional input from the council members as to how they see that moving, because it's the council members that want to move in that direction. And I also think that the community should be involved in how we move forward.
Okay. My next question. You talked about overtime, and you talked about the reimbursements, and that the reimbursements do not go back into the overtime bucket. Where do they go?
They go into a revenue stream, some kind of revenue account. I'm not sure.
Okay.
That's handled by finance department.
Okay. And then y'all operate by fiscal year, correct? Like, so like the end of the fiscal year was June 30th. And there's going to be information about how many police calls and crimes and stuff that committed. Do you know when that report will be done and be able to be seen?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
I mean, so like the fiscal year ended, like just wanted more information, like like how many police calls y'all got, the crime statistics. Do y'all do that at the end of the year, or y'all do that at the end of the fiscal year?
Well, that's done on a monthly basis. We actually have a lot of information on Transparent Richmond that automatically downloads that information on a monthly basis. But UCR reporting for the year is done at the end of the year, not fiscal year, calendar year.
Gotcha. Just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah, just as a note, Transparent Richmond has a lot of stuff. I highly recommend if you've never been to it. A lot of city details. Yeah.
Okay. I appreciate that. Yeah, those are my questions. I think Stephen Lacey has questions.
Diego raised his hand before I did, so go ahead, Diego.
Thank you, Stephen. Chief, I have a question regarding a different model. I know that Berkeley, the city of Berkeley, was discussing on maybe doing a lot of the traffic patrol done by not the police officers, by other departments or civilians. Is that something that you guys have discussed or even thought about to relieve a lot of the police officers' duties?
No, I haven't heard of that model. I know that they're doing something around mental health, but I haven't heard anything around traffic enforcement or
traffic enforcement, and I believe even those types of violations. So that way the police have more time with higher priorities.
I have to look into that model.
Okay, other questions?
I don't have a question. I do have something brief to say though. Ms. French, I just want to thank you for support in general. You've been very supportive since I met you, and I appreciate that. And I really see everything turning over in the community with the work that you're putting in. So let's keep going, and wherever we can help, that's what the commission is for. So
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
I have a comment when everyone's done.
I think everyone's done. I don't know where you went.
Okay. So, Chief, you know, I'm gonna use this platform because sometimes it's really hard to communicate to the whole RPD. And I think there's been a lot of talk about defunding the police. There's definitely been a lot of misunderstanding on what it means to defund the police. I think there's been definitely a lot of animosity from community members to police officers to organizations, just in general. You know, what that looks like, because there isn't really a picture of it yet. It's scary. I can imagine on both ends, you know, from the community and from the police department. And I support the idea that there's certain things that need to be cut from the police department so that other, like mental health issues, like I approve of having like a mental health crisis mobile, van or whatever they have in other counties come out to those calls, so those 5150 calls specifically. And I think, our job as a commission is to improve the relationship with the community and the police department. And I think it's important for me, that there is that understanding for all your officers, that at least from my perspective, that's what I'm envisioning when we hear defund. I don't particularly like the word defund, but I can understand where that's coming from. And I do agree that, there are certain things that need to be moved so that our community feels safer because of issues that have been happening, and so I just really want to reassure officers, RPD, that we're trying to work so that this works for our community and for yourself, because ultimately that's our job in the police commission, is to make sure that we better the relationship. And it's our job to voice things that aren't necessarily working for us, and that we find a solution that's going to work for us and work for RPG, and that we meet in the middle. So as we're having conversations, somebody asked me the other day, well, why are you not vocal on Facebook and some of the groups? Because I see a lot of the conversations happening. It's not easy for some of us to be vocal publicly, especially on social media, because things aren't said the right way, or emotions aren't translated the right way on Facebook or, on groups. So I am open, if anyone wants to meet with me in person, to sit down and have a conversation with me as a police commissioner. I mean, I've done it with people as a person, but as a police commissioner, like, what do I think? What I support and why I support it, versus going this back and forth. I don't feel that really helps anyone, to bicker and argue on social media, because things aren't said or understood the same way. And if we really want to work to make sure that Richmond is safer for all, like, we have to be the ones to really work at it. So I really just want to reassure everyone that the work that we're doing and things that I personally approve of, it's really with the intent to improve the relationship that we have with you all. I don't, I know that a lot of people get offended with the word defunding, but I mean, when we talk about education, the word defund comes up. When we talk about other things, the word defund comes up. So I just hope that we go away from the focus of defunding the police, to really just making sure that we do. That's why I had the questions like, well, how do we decide what's going to be taken out of what you all are going to do? Some of the ride-alongs that I went to, the calls that your officers were responding to were like so petty. And like, really, you guys don't have the training for some of the other calls. And it's like, people also need to understand that you don't need to call the cops for this, like, we need them to do whatever they got to do, but we also need to do what we have to do. So having that open conversation and really being respectful of you guys, and also of our community and what our voices are and what we have to say, I think in the long run, we're going to be able to work with each other and support each other in this, so I really wanted to get that out. So yesterday I was parking here at home, and I probably shouldn't have done this, but there was an officer parked, and he parked in my spot. Well, I call it my spot, but I just rolled down my window, I said hi, and I could see like how he felt like, well, who the heck is this, and I was like, hi, no, I'm Yanni, I'm the police commissioner, how are you, nice to meet you. And his whole demeanor changed. He's like, oh, hi, hey, how are you, nice to meet you. It's like, it should be like that for all of us. Like, I want to get to the point where, I mean, if not all, but a lot of our community feels the same way. Like, we could just come to an officer and say, hey, how are you? Nice to meet you, whatever. And, I when I saw him yesterday, I really started thinking about like, man, I really just want to have a healthy relationship with RPD. And really be understanding. So thank you so much for all the work that you do. And I look forward to being a part of that conversation and being at the table, not only on this side, but on the other side, and helping create that bridge. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Just if I can respond to that really quickly, I think that a majority, if not all of our police force understands what the defunding was, what it actually means, what people are looking to happen. And that's where we understand that resources need to be put in other areas, especially mental health, homeless services and stuff like that. What's challenging for us is, the funding part of it, of course. And maybe it is that, once these resources are up and running and effective and, we're not being called upon to handle a lot of these things, that maybe we don't need 200 officers like we did in the past. Maybe we can survive with only 150, but there were some things that were said, especially in council meeting, about defunding the entire police department of $70 million. I mean, that's our entire budget. And when you say things like that, they have consequences. We already had a lot of officers leave, like I've told you guys over and over the last year, because of, this whole issue of overtime keeps coming up. Our officers don't want to work as much of overtime as that they've had to work because of minimum staffing. And so when you're talking about defunding, they're thinking of losing their jobs. I mean, we have officers looking to go to other departments, which I would hate to lose a lot of the new officers that we just hired. We hired a lot of officers of color recently, and that are integrating really well with the community. And so those are going to be the first officers to go. And so words have consequences. And when you say defund the entire police department by $70 million, I think it, that really hit our department really hard, and people felt unappreciated, demoralized. And, but in terms of the big picture, I think people, our officers understand that money should go into some other resources, and they actually want that to happen. It's just that at this point, I don't know where the money will come from. We just gave up, close to $10 million, and that money is not going to resources. That's, so that's the challenge. We can't hear you, David.
Other questions or comments for Chief French? Okay, looks like that's it, Chief. Thank you very much. Stick around for the rest. Mr. Myrick, I see you're here on the phone. Mr. Myrick?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So I think the basic update from the council, I mean, it's going to be similar to the conversation you just had with the chief. In fact, I think that conversation is going to be a conversation that we're having for the next, few months in terms of how are we going to look at policing. So the council did adopt a budget last night. That budget does balance what started out as a $29 million deficit. We were actually able to get a lot of savings from things like, not doing festivals and sort of not doing things this year that we would normally do, as a result of COVID anyway. But towards the end, as the chief told you, we did have to make some harsh cuts or some tough decisions, certainly related to the police department, freezing all of the positions at most of the positions the chief, all of the sworn positions that the chief was asking for, and many of the non-sworn ones as well. We also had to balance the budget by, a number of accommodations that we're hoping to get from bargaining units. But one of those was furloughs, and we decided not to do the furloughs. And instead, we reduced the overtime budget even further, which means that this conversation that we've had already around, that you're having with the chief around how are we going to deal with and change the policing model in the city of Richmond, is going to be necessary just for us to, under any circumstances, just for us to not have overtime budget sort of balloon, just for us to make what's already there. So we also, as I know you all are aware, passed the item last night directing staff to begin that process and to establish a task force of community members to meet with the chief and others and go over ideas for how we reimagine public safety in the city of Richmond, and to begin the process and see if there's a new policing model that we can transition to before the end of this coming fiscal year, or this current fiscal year now. Because again, we're just not going to make the overtime numbers alone unless we do that. So that process is beginning. I don't think that that's a process that's going to happen quickly. As I'm sure many of you are aware, the council was, under pressure actually to do substantially more. We were under pressure to cut the police department by 20%. I do not believe that that would have been a responsible thing to do at this moment without first, looking at all these other questions. So we were able to hold off on that. But it's clear that there is a lot of interest in that from the community. And we know that at the same time, the community is making record complaints about fireworks and things like that. We know at the same time that there's still, a steady amount of calls to the police department for service. So, this is a conversation that we are going to have as a community about what is it that we want our police to be doing. You all are going to obviously have to play a role in that conversation with us as well in the coming months. So I guess that's where I will stop, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Myrick? Yenny.
Jael, how are you or the council gonna pick who gets to be in this task force?
So I think the motion that we made was that it was going to be, we're going to follow the model that we did with the homelessness task force, which we, I think, established, in 2017, I think. And so the homelessness task force, and I don't remember the specifics, but the idea is that it's open, that it kind of, if you're a member of the public and you want to do the work and you're willing to come, then you'll sort of be allowed. But we're going to figure out how we formalize that in the next couple of days. To be honest with you, the way the motion happened, a lot of the things last night, it was sort of a back and forth between me and the other council members to you're sort of kind of negotiating with each other in the moment. And so in terms of figuring out what it looks like, I think, we have to sort of sit down and write that out. But the general idea is going to be that it's open to, anybody in the public that wants to really participate. And so we're going to have to just figure out the details for that.
Let's see, other questions from Mr. Myrick. Randy Joseph.
Hey, JL. My question is more to we sent you our recommendation to amend the ordinance, and I wanted to hear an update on that.
Yes, so many other things have happened. I know that the next step for that anyway was a meet and confer with the police officers union. Obviously, since then, a whole lot of other things have come up that are required bargaining with the police officers union. So, we've been bargaining with them around the budget and around some of the give backs being needed for the budget. We're going to have to be bargaining with them around these questions around broader policing. So I do think that has taken a back seat, but I can check in and see if any of that meet and confer that was supposed to happen, if any preliminary meet and confers have happened.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? I don't see anybody waving. So I guess thank you very much, Mr. Myrick.
All right, thank you all.
Okay. Let's see, Ben Terrio for the RPOA.
Evening, Commission. Ben Terrio, President, Richmond Police Officers Association. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I want to start off tonight with just kind of going over a few things that were touched on, and then things that the POA has done the past month. Obviously, it's been very hectic, very changing and challenging times. But we think we're looking forward to being part of the progress and part of the way forward. Some of the things that we've done this month, we gave $2,500 to the Center for Youth Development Through Law, which is a program that's operated in the schools that tries to specifically targets youth of color to basically look into basically government and law and the justice system and ways to participate and hopefully gain a better understanding so that they will become involved in that as their career if they so choose. So that's something that we donate to every year. The chief and I will be participating in a Richmond Police Activities League youth forum at the end of the month, which I anticipate will probably be more like a listening session, which will be a youth-led kind of idea that hopefully will, like I said, I'm really hoping it turns out to be more of a listening session to see what where the youth stand on where they want police reform and change to go. I participated in several labor actions over the past few weeks because of the budget, and included a Black Lives Matter labor protest around City Hall, and that's what kind of the not just piggyback on what the chief said about having new hires learn what it means to be a Richmond police officer and work within the community. That's something that we support and have pushed heavily for new hires recently. Also, something that we've thought about and kicked around for other new positive ideas is maybe having the CPRC being part of the hiring process as its own separate entity and separate step, if you will, on the hiring process. I think there could be a value to that as well. And earlier this month in June, there's been a lot of changes, and I'll kind of go into this in a second. There's a lot of changes in progress and around reform and ideas and some of the things that are already out there are things that California already leads the way in. And that's kind of always a big problem when police issues occur nationally, because usually California is already way ahead of the curve. And also locally, we're generally even more steps ahead of where everyone else in California is at. So I went up to the California, or via Zoom, I should say, through the California Post, which is the agency that determines all of our training and standards, and advocated against the use of carotid and chokeholds. And it's not a popular position to take amongst my peers, but that was a thing that a couple of us who were in a couple of police union heads here in the Bay Area thought was necessary to do. And kind of segues into one of the things that was talked about at great length was Campaign Zero. And Campaign Zero, and I know you guys are going to talk about it later on tonight, but the Campaign Zero campaign is a kind of a broader, it's a campaign that's sponsored by two different groups, two different nonprofit groups. And, it's kind of activist led. It's led by people who probably have good intentions, but the data and the information that they're drawing down upon isn't always accurate. A lot of things that were pushed out by the Campaign Zero folks regarding our policy and then subsequently by the mayor are not really accurate. And one of the great ironies of it all is if you looked on the Campaign Zero site itself, it actually listed two places as being basically the places that you should strive to be if you're trying to reduce fatalities by law enforcement. And one of those places was none other than Richmond, California. And that was something that was definitely missed, I think, by a lot of people who were calling in and mass emailing the council. And something that really needs to be addressed and brought up, because again, you have this campaign that you input in your city and they just say, well, these are the policies and these are things that are not doing, that aren't working, or are not in compliance with what we think use of force policy should be. But their information is wrong, it's incorrect. They don't have California state law incorporated into policies. So we have policies, but we also have state law that limits what type of things we can do with force. And a lot of that was just simply overlooked because those laws have been passed within the past year. And the state law and they're mandated, even though they might not be in the policy per se, it's something that's trained and pushed out to the police officers as the standard. So that's basically the gist I have for Campaign Zero. There's additional policy changes in progress. I'm looking forward to hearing what other people might have in mind obviously from the police commission. That's definitely your guys' purview. I think any type of information and ideas that you guys can share, I think are really important. And yeah, I'm looking forward to that conversation. As far as overtime, like the chief said, you can't regulate a lot of overtime. Remember, it's a 365-day, 24/7 operation. In fact, I'm a little curious because the council, despite all the back and forth last night, is having a special session tomorrow morning. And I'm assuming it has something to do with the budget, maybe to fix a few things that they wanted to change from last night. I don't know. But overtime is something that can be transparent and can be reduced, but it cannot be completely done away with. Not when you have like I said, a 24/7, 365-day operation. And that's not just for cops, but firefighters, but the public works, tree falls down the street, we're not just going to let it sit. You're not going to let it sit in the street and the parkway for the whole weekend. I mean, it's not how, or till the morning. That's just not how it works. I think with the task force, there's a lot of good ideas that can be brought forward, that things that we can reduce. But I also think there's a lot of things that people have very limited basis and knowledge about, as far as how the world works and how a lot of these types of calls would respond to. Although many of us don't want to go to them, they're going to require a police response. And I'm looking forward to having those conversations with people, because I think it's going to be a real eye opener to people about the things that police do go to, the training that we do receive, and what monumental things it would take to change that. For example, with county health clinicians will not come out without a police officer, period. Now, if we can get that to change, that's great. But currently they will not come out without a police officer, and they won't come out in crisis. They won't come out after the fact, and that's it. That's something that people need to look at. AMR, medical, and fire, they will not respond to a scene unless if there's any inclination there's some type of security issue, they will not respond until the cops show up first. So I think there's a lot of conflicting issues, and a lot of conflicting information about what we can or can't respond to. And I hope that this will all get merited out. But I think some people just think that it's just something you can just like pull a lever, take some money away and push it aside and just throw it somewhere else. And that's just going to solve a bunch of problems. And it's just not the case at all. It has to be done with adults in the room having real serious conversations about the consequences and repercussions and the benefits that could come with a lessened police response. And I think those are all pertinent conversations that people have to have going forward. Diego, I heard you talk about the Berkeley model, getting rid of traffic calls. That's kind of absurd. Traffic, we have one of the worst records in the state of traffic crashes with collisions with injuries. People crash all day in this city, and there's lots of injuries and maiming of people nonstop. We have DUI problem that's off the chain. And a lot of our stops, render firearms that are unlawfully carried by people. So I hear things like that. And again, it's kind of one of those things, like it sounds good in theory, but if you actually play it out logically, it might be a lot more difficult. So yeah, that's just kind of one of the things that popped off the top of my head. And then just in general, like kind of to echo what the chief said, I mean, there was there's been a huge morale issue about the cops and the defunding issue, because like I said, there's a lot of different people saying one thing or the other, and defunding, I agree, is not the correct term, because when you say defund, it really means take away, and some of you guys here, advocated for a 20% takeaway, and the 20% takeaway of the police department in its current state is 57 cops. That's what that means. And that's, if that's what people want to go for, then it's kind of like, by all means, do your thing. But I think there will be serious issues if you take another 20% away from what we've already taken away, what the chief has already had to give up. And, that's an issue. And as I've said many times before in public session, 7,000 calls a month. So when people say that, I hear people like, well, people don't trust the police. people call us all the time for all kinds of issues. Sometimes maybe because they're the only people who respond. I'll definitely give that up. But when people say there's a trust issue of police in the city, it's just not the case. We did not have nearly any of the looting problems that other cities did. We did not have the civil disturbance problems that people had in other places. This city is unique, and we've built up a great thing here between the community. And I think that's and when I mean just community, I mean everyone, because I really resist this talk that there's like sides. When you say that there are sides in something, then you're advocating that there's some type of us versus them thing, and that's just not the right frame of mind to talk about when it comes with the police and the community. So we'll see how these things go forward, and that's our position. We're looking forward to working to that end and doing a good job for the residents of Richmond. Thank you.
Questions for Officer Terrio? Oscar.
So Ben actually reminded me of something that I learned recently. So I serve on the board of a mental health nonprofit in Richmond, Familias Unidas. And as part of that, I've met a lot of mental health experts who serve folks in Richmond and throughout West County. And I reached out to a lot of them to ask this question about whether police intervention is needed when someone is having a mental crisis. I've actually witnessed 2 as part of police ride-alongs, but I wanted to ask them, the professionals, what they thought. And hands down, they all said that police intervention is often and usually required when someone is having a serious mental health crisis. And I wanted to share that with the council or the commission because I think that's an important thing to know that some of these mental health crises are a danger not only to the individual, but their families, neighbors, etc. And so that's why police intervention is required. So I just wanted to share that tidbit with everyone.
Other questions or comments? Okay, thank you, Ben. We will move on. Mr. Threet, briefly, what do you have in the pipeline for us?
So
Jerry?
Several things are underway currently.
What do you have in the pipeline for us for reports?
I'm talking, you're not hearing me?
I can hear
Hello?
you.
No, go ahead. It's my connection is not great.
Okay. So there are several things underway. I have one that is a complaint that we've discussed before, but still waiting for the evidence that the complainant has promised to provide for over a month. If I get that, then I can proceed with that. There are 2 officer-involved shootings that are underway. I have all of the evidence in those cases, and I'm in the stage of analyzing it. We still have the investigation that we looked at that I'm going to go back and see about a couple of things that the commission had questions on. And recently I got the evidence for the shooting by the off-duty sergeant in Vallejo, and I'm beginning to look at that evidence. So that's what is in the pipeline. I think the most likely thing to come to the commission at the next meeting are the 2 officer-involved shootings.
Okay, I would think that'll probably be not before September because we historically don't have her in August.
Okay.
So for your planning, that's probably going to be September. Other questions? I'm sorry. Any other questions for Mr. Threet on what's in the pipeline? Randy?
So just to clarify, the question last month about the incident in Vallejo is being investigated.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, other questions? Okay, next item under old business is to plan for the August retreat. Sorry?
We have a comment for that one. And it's from Cordell Hindler. And basically, he has some ideas regarding the retreat in August. He provided what he thinks is a good agenda, and I emailed it to you all. And it'll also be made as part of public record as part of the meeting minutes.
Okay, very good. Thank you. It was my intention to try and structure the August retreat as a listening session, an opportunity for members of the community that maybe couldn't get here on a Wednesday night to have an opportunity to address the commission and an opportunity for the commission to sit and listen to the concerns of the community. It does not appear that we would be able to do that on any kind of an in-person basis. I had some communications today from the OES lady in the city. And basically the long and short of it is not to plan anything in a city venue for an in-person session. So I guess the questions that I have for the commission are, we all think it's worthwhile to attempt to do a listening session via Zoom? Or should we postpone this until sometime, I have no idea when it would be, but until sometime when we can get together again? Randy, are you holding a hand up?
I was, but Oscar was before me.
Oscar.
Thank you, Randy. I don't think from a COVID-19 standpoint, it's not looking good. So I don't think we're going to be able to meet in person for a while. So I'm leaning towards just meeting over Zoom in August. I think there's a few items that we can discuss, but just wanted to throw that out there.
Are you thinking of, in essence, a regular meeting, perhaps with a shortened agenda?
No, I was thinking as much as we can simulate our prior retreats where we get some refresher training and then discuss topics that are important to all of us. I've always found them to be pretty useful if we can get a combination of both of those.
Yeah, I'm along with Oscar. I do believe that we do need to have some form of a listening session. I want to hear what the community thinks, and I want to hear their opinion, because right now we're in a time. You all right? You froze there for a minute.
Yeah, go ahead. I've got a wonky connection.
It's the AT&T. I've been telling y'all. I've been trying to figure out how to get the community to get to listen, like to hear their complaints and to see where they want us to go. And I'm fine with that, but I also agree with to have some training to get some of that work done. So half and half, I'm fine with to figure that out. But I think we do have some committee work to do some breakouts with our committees that we can do as well, that we can do during the retreat.
Okay. Other questions or comments about an August retreat? If you all want to get your calendars out, and I know this is kind of a clunky way to do it, but with the Brown Act, it's the way we have to do it. I would be looking at perhaps the 22nd of August.
Can't do the 22nd. I'll be out of town.
Okay, that's one. Anybody else that has a problem? Oscar's okay for the 22nd. Let's see. Is the 15th better for Carol? Okay, that's a yes. I'm not hearing any significant objection to the 15th of August.
Only if you guys get me a cake, because that's my birthday weekend.
Get you a cake and deliver
Over
it to
Zoom.
you over Zoom.
Yeah,
I'll get you
Maybe
a
we
cake,
can
but then
sing
I'll eat
happy
it.
birthday.
I'll blow out the candles for you
All
and then
right,
send it
sounds
to you.
good.
COVID free.
Okay, so let's go ahead and mark our calendars for August 15th. I will discuss with Mr. Souble and perhaps others what sorts of trainings might be valuable. Let's go ahead and plan that from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., which has been our pattern. And I will try and put something together that will not be a complete waste of our time. I am always thrilled to have another commissioner to volunteer to help with that retreat. And oh, thank you, Commissioner Joseph. I accept your offer to help. Very good. All right. Let's move on. Okay. Under new business, we've got consideration of the 8 can't wait recommendations.
So David,
Sorry?
we have 2 comments for that one. Do you want to do it after?
No, we can go ahead and take them now.
Okay. So the first one was sent via email.
Go ahead, Johnny.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine, Shani.
Okay.
We can hear you.
The first one was sent via email. I emailed it to you guys if you want to follow along. It's from Margot Cunningham. She says, "Dear members of the Community Police Review Commission, please accept these comments. Consider the 8 can't wait recommendations, RPD's adoption or non-adoption of same, and discuss and vote on recommendations. I urge the commission to adopt all 8 of the 8 can't wait recommendations in order to improve police performance and community safety. While the Richmond Police Department Policy Manual has 2 of the 8 can't wait recommendations, duty to intervene and require warning before shooting, their manual is lacking or not clear on the other 6 recommendations. See below." So she goes on to list the different ones. The first one is ban chokeholds and strangleholds. The police manual prohibits only the carotid control hold. The policy should prohibit any maneuver that cuts off oxygen or blood flow, including chokeholds and carotid restraints. Number 2, require de-escalation. The police department policy manual suggests de-escalation where officers believe a person is mentally ill or has a developmental disability, but de-escalation should be required in all circumstances because a person may not be mentally ill, but may have a hearing impairment, may not understand the language of the officer, may be suffering from a physical disability, may have taken drugs, may be distracted by noise or other people, or for some other reason may not be able to comply with the officer's commands. The policy should also suggest de-escalation techniques such as respectful communication, maintaining distance, slowing things down, and otherwise eliminating the need to use force. Number 3, require exhausting all alternatives before shooting. The policy manual doesn't require officers to exhaust all other means before resorting to shooting. The policy should require reasonable alternatives first, such as talking a person down, keeping a safe distance, using minimum force tactics. Number 4, ban shooting at moving vehicles. The language in the policy only discourages shooting at or from moving vehicles. The language should be stronger. It should not allow shooting at vehicles except under extreme circumstances. Number 5, has use of force continuum. The policy manual doesn't have a use of force continuum, which restricts the most severe types of force to the most extreme situations and creates clear restrictions on the use of each police weapon and tactic. The explanation offered by RPD, citing 300.32 factors used to determine the reasonableness of force, is not a force is not a use of force continuum. It is instead a list of factors affecting use of force. Types of weapons and tactics are not mentioned. Okay, a continuum is a continuous sequence from one extreme to the other, and a use of force continuum should outline what types of tactics and weapons should be used for various situations from mild to extreme. Number 6, which is the last one, require comprehensive reporting. The policy should require officers to report when they point a firearm at or threaten to use other types of force against a civilian. Thank you. And so I did email these to you guys so that you can read them on your own, and they will also be made a part of the meeting minutes. And the next speaker would be Ben Terrio. Ben, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah, the as I said earlier about the 8 can't wait, those anyone had any questions, that isn't it's really not spot on with what SB 230, what the state law requires, and what we already practice and train. And it's just not correct. I mean, that's what happens when you have a massive kind of, and again, it's an activist led thing. It is what it is, but that's not the correct, a lot of those things, it's not correct that we're only fulfilling 2 of those it's just not the case. And we have already, there's no like strangleholds and chokeholds. We don't have carotid holds. We don't teach that. So therefore it's not authorized. It's just that simple. That's how that works. And so that's what's one of the small examples that I can provide where, the 8 can't wait campaign is great. And I'm glad that people read that stuff, but they're not really understanding and putting things together, because if it's not trained by the department, it's not authorized, you can't do it. And it's just that simple. But when people don't see that it's written down somewhere, they think it's all good. So it's something that's getting fixed along with de-escalation. That's something that we're putting into place. But again, de-escalation is required already by SB 230. And it's something that you're going to, if it just means writing something down, then so be it. But it's already required by law. And that's kind of the disconnect that I've mentioned before between people who are coming up with these things or reading policies and not understanding all the different things that go in together with what training police officers have and how they use it on the street. Thanks.
Other comments, Shani?
No, that's it.
Okay. The thing that concerns me the most, and to some extent we will combine the discussion under A and C. There was an arrest that took place that appeared to my inexpert eyes to be exactly the opposite of a de-escalation. Shani, would you play the first video that I have referenced in the agenda? I think it's 2.5 minutes, and I think it's important for us to review this. And I want you to pay attention particularly to the colloquy that takes place between the officer and the individual who was eventually arrested. Go ahead, Shani.
So David, we have a speaker. Are we on C1 at this time?
We are on, yes, C1.
Okay, because we do have Ben who signed up to speak on that one before I play the video.
Okay, Ben, do you want to do that?
Sure. Isn't it a separate item? I don't understand.
Well, yes, we were talking about A, right? And then that's what I'm trying to understand. Did we go from A to C1?
In my view, the issues under A, particularly the issue of de-escalation, there's a great deal of relevance to the video in C1 to the whole concept of de-escalation or its absence. So I'm in essence, combining them because I think we're talking about the same subject. So if you have comments on C1, if you want to make them at this time, that's great.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, I mean, a comment for C1, it's again, it's go hand in hand with, you can tie in the de-escalation or whatever. But I mean, the officer, Ahmed Kalfan, is conducting his car stop, and he's conducting a search. It looks like a further search for contraband, which is essentially kind of like treated like an open container. And he's verbally harassed by a man who comes up and, you know, who happens to be a convicted firearm person, and someone that the officers are very familiar with in that area and have dealt with before. And the guy makes a threat to him, which is unlawful under state law. And the guy moves back to his vehicle, and that directs the Officer Kalfan, towards him. And it's not a de-escalation issue. It's it's because that boundary's been crossed, and behavior matters. He was threatened. That officer was threatened, and you know, if I'm threatened and someone goes back towards a car, I'm gonna be my thought process as an officer is someone's going back to get something. That's very real and present threat in the streets of Richmond. That's if people don't want to address that, that's fine. But people carry guns in their cars here. And if someone makes a threat to a police officer, 99% of the public is not going to do that. Most people will never do that. But that officer took action, and it's something that, you know, the vast majority of people at the police department feel was appropriate to address. And that's all.
All right, let's look at the video.
And Yenny has her hand up. I don't know if that means she wanted to say something before we watch the video, or.
I have a question before we watch the video.
Go ahead.
So just to be clear, and I can put my mind into this, like, are we, because it says we're voting and discussing on a policy recommendation.
That's correct.
On this item. So we're gonna sit here and talk about what we want to recommend to RPD in regards to the 8 can't wait.
As part and parcel of the discussion of 8 can't wait is a discussion of de-escalation. I view the video differently than I think Ben does, and I think that it's instructive to take a look at it and to let that frame, if y'all think it appropriate, a discussion regarding an opportunity for de-escalation that got missed, an opportunity for de-escalation that resulted in an officer not in combination with other officers, not in a considered fashion, but in a way that looks to me like ego and anger, results in a failure of de-escalation. I find it very troubling. So yeah, that's what we're going to talk about.
Okay.
Johnny.
I will go ahead and put on the video. Just a moment.
Thank you.
Give me a second, guys, to share this with you. Just one.
You can have 2 seconds.
You can record, but have a seat.
Oh, I don't have to.
Do it.
I'll get it. Just keep your hands on the head.
I'm going to do what I have to do to you guys too.
And my phone on my lap.
Let me call
Hang
you
on.
guys. You know what I'm saying? 'Cause it's against the law. You can't make me sit in no car and tell
Step
me
out for me. Is there any more weed in the car? Can you grab my phone?
I got you.
Is there any more weed in the car?
Yeah, it's right up. I believe it's either in there or in my car.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay,
Step up.
okay, but you guys need to learn how to talk.
Separate your feet for me.
You need to listen.
It's in, you said it's up there?
I didn't jump. I just sit up.
Yeah, either up in that console or in the middle.
Let me call your mom.
Separate your feet for me.
Here.
Hey, bro, come search me too. Come on. Let's just get the process going. One at a time. Let's go.
I understand why this is happening.
We've done this before.
So having weed is just like having an open container, right? So, well, I did smell it, and that's why I identified that before.
Weed.
Keep talking. We'll come deal with you when we're done. Don't worry about it.
That shit's sad.
I said keep talking.
Straight up, I'm not in those streets, bro. I ain't got shit to do with your
All right, then go over there.
Stop talking to me. I'm over here.
Then go over there.
Fuck wrong with you, nigga?
Go over there.
My granny stay right here, nigga.
That's fine.
Fuck wrong with you?
That's
Which
fine.
is her granny too.
Are you gonna chill out?
Who the fuck do you think you're talking to?
Are you gonna chill out?
Fuck wrong, because if I cough on you, Spooner, you gonna want to slap me and shoot me in my face, then
Are you gonna chill
So
out?
who else you talking to, bro? Straight up, nigga, do your job, nigga. Who you came here for, nigga? Beat your ass.
Yo, what? Yo, what?
Stop playing me. What? Who are you talking to? Bro, what is you doing, bro? Bro, what is you doing? Bro, what is you doing?
Okay, so are we back?
We're back.
Okay. This struck me as a significant missed opportunity to de-escalate a situation. The threat, and I give it to you, it's a threat. I'll kick your ass. The officer doesn't combine with another officer in order to approach the individual with more than one officer. The officer, in essence, gets, it's my impression, gets mad and grabs the guy. This exposes the officer to significant risk of injury. It's a situation where the officer initiates a physical fight and fails to dominate. And that just creates a dangerous situation for everybody. I would be very interested to know what the chief thinks about this with respect to a policy that requires or even suggests de-escalation. This was not a case of de-escalation. It was quite the opposite.
Hello. So this case is in our under review by our Office of Professional Accountability. There's an open case that's being investigated where we're looking into every aspect of it. And once we have the findings of that, I'll be prepared to discuss it. But I need to let the investigative process go through before I actually make some comments about it.
What do we need to do as a police commission to discourage a situation such as this, where rather than de-escalate the situation, it's my impression that the officer escalated the situation. He gets into a verbal debate with the guy when he's supposed to be doing this car stop for weed, and he pushes aside one of his colleagues who's standing there looking at the individual. He physically pushes him aside in order to get to the individual and to accost him. This, to me, is a textbook example of a missed opportunity for de-escalation. And I was floored, frankly, that a Richmond cop is going to put hands on somebody for running his mouth like that. In all my years, both stints on the police commission, I've never seen a Richmond cop go off like this on an individual for running his mouth. And so if this doesn't call out for a formal policy requiring de-escalation, then I don't know what does. This didn't have to go down. There didn't have to be a taser. There didn't have to be a wrestling match.
I agree that there are concerns that we need to address, whether they be policy or training or conversations with our staff about what we should and shouldn't be doing in situations like this. And as I said before, once the investigation goes through and we figure out, all the aspects of it, then we will continue with those conversations internally and address it appropriately.
Diego Garcia.
Chief, how old is this? Well, not how old is he? How long has he been in the department? Is he a rookie or is he a veteran?
Not a rookie. He's been here for more than a year, more than a couple years. He's been an officer for more than a couple years.
Randy Joseph.
So these are my concerns, and I'm going to make this as PC as possible. My first concern is it goes to what Ben said. Like, they already, before he got there, he already said he was a convicted person, right? So you already labeled him already. He's a convicted felon, so he's already a bad person when you say convicted felon. That's the first issue that I had. Like Ben said himself, he was a convicted felon who's violent. So you're already right there think this guy is violent, so I already have a preconceived notion of what he's going to do. That's one. Two, to keep talking, I'll come over here and handle you. That's another problem. That's the escalation part, right? If he doesn't say that and continues to do what he does, I don't think it goes there. My third thing and most important, which y'all do have one thing I want to talk about, is your taser policy. And part of the taser policy is that you shoot it with a person and there's nobody else in the area that would get hurt. There was 2 civilians in the area when that taser was shot. And that's one of the concerns, because if he would have missed that taser, hit one of the civilians by the fence, that's a different problem altogether, upon everything else. So that's something that I really want to follow. So that's policy you already have in the books, and I don't think that was followed through correctly. So that's something that I want to see follow through. And any comments about the taser policy is something I would like to talk about.
So once we got the lawsuit for this case, that's when I sent it to Office of Professional Accountability for investigation. So all the aspects of the case from beginning to end will be looked at.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I want to see the filing of that. Yeah, I don't know if we can make policy recommendations off that video without seeing the results of the investigation, because I feel like you already, compared to what you have from the 8-8 that Ben and y'all are saying, hey, that's already on the books, we already have that, and to see an officer escalate something that didn't need to be escalated, that, like, you can have the policy, making sure that people are following the policy that's on the books. And that's my concern. The taser policy's been on the books. It's in the Richmond handbook that I made sure to go back and read. That should be followed and put in the books. And so it's not so much making new recommendations to me, it's following the recommendations that you already have and following through on those. And that's the problem that I have. And those are the things that, watching that video, that the bias already in the head of the police officer. I know that I think we talked before about having that implicit bias training, and two, the escalation of it, and then 3, the taser policy that you already have on record.
I have a question whenever.
Go ahead.
Following up on what Randy said, just for clarification, and I'm not saying that this is right or wrong, but I don't believe they knew that he had a warrant till after, or not a warrant. I mean that he was a convicted felon until after after what happened. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that was known before, because he was just running his mouth. They hadn't even run his name or anything. So, but anyhow, one of the things that I find interesting and troubling is, I believe, and Chief, please tell me if this is not correct, is anytime that a taser is, or any force is used, like, the police officer has to tell the person, like, hey, there should have been a warning, basically. Hey, if you don't stop, I'm gonna tase you, right? Is that not correct? Like, there should be a warning sign, or like a warning that he's gonna get tased before he actually gets tased.
So if it's reasonable, then they're able to give it. He was giving chase, and so it's not necessarily reasonable that he would be yelling, "Stop or I'll tase you." In a shooting scenario, then that would be the case.
And it's not, and I'm just going by what I see in the video, and it's not reasonable because he's far away from him. Because I mean, they're pretty close when he tased him.
Yeah, it's not a mandate in our policy that he yell to him that he's going to tase him first.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'll hold off on my.
This case, I could not help but reflecting back on the case involving the death of Petty Perez, where Mr. Perez failed to cooperate with the police officer by standing up from his seated position and essentially walking away. And again, this is a case where the police officer initiated the violence. Officer Jensen, I believe, made a statement to the effect that he threw some kind of a judo move at Mr. Perez. And again, he was unsuccessful in dominating the individual that he was putting hands on. And the upshot of it was that Petty Perez got shot 3 times. Looking at this case and reflecting on it in light of that case, this was a very dangerous set of conduct by the police officer in failing to de-escalate this. It just, I grant that I'm not out there 24/7 and I don't have the depth of experience. What I see is somebody got his ego involved in this and blew it up into something that it didn't have to be. If he had simply gone about his business with his marijuana car stop and not engaged in a dialogue with somebody who was not the subject of the investigation, then it never would have gone to this, is my supposition. I thank God that it only went to a taser and didn't end up with firearms. I think that there's a problem in American policing. I think back to the Bay Bridge case. And, say what you want to say about the dead guy. He had killed somebody or he'd committed a robbery. He was being pursued, blah, blah, blah. He stopped on the freeway. He's in his car, and rather than simply immobilize him and wait him out, Fairfield PD insists on putting those grenades through the window. So again, this is a case where the status quo is nobody's getting hurt, and the status quo gets interrupted by the law enforcement officers who take it to the next level, who insist on putting rounds through the window and driving the guy out. There's an insufficient appreciation for the sanctity of life, in my view, in American policing today. And it's a problem, and it's one we got to start talking about. There was a third case. It just went out of my mind. But again, it was the same thing. It was where the officer initiates the violent conduct and then fails to dominate. It's so dangerous. As the officer's employer, the last thing I want him to do is to get his ego involved in this. If he felt it necessary to arrest this guy, a de-escalation might have been him talking to the officer instead of pushing him out of his way to get to the guy. He says to the officer, okay, the guy committed a PC 69. Let's approach him and take him into custody. That's not what happened. And I got to tell you, Chief, I'm outraged that a Richmond cop would subject himself to the risk of injury for somebody running his mouth. It's unacceptable. I believe we ought to adopt a formal policy that requires de-escalation at every opportunity. This thing didn't have to happen. I'm glad nobody died. And the upshot of it is a screaming demand for de-escalation. That's all I have to say about this.
I want to say something.
Yeah, I've had my hand up now for a while.
I'm sorry, Oscar.
Sorry. All right, Chief, actually, were you going to respond to David first?
Yeah, I was going to say that we are adopting a de-escalation policy that is actually written out. We are looking at language. We have some language. I wanted to see what language you guys were going to also provide so that when we have these meet and confers with the POA, that we have all the language and we're not having to do multiple meet and confer sessions with them on establishing the language, but we are adopting specific language around de-escalation.
I think that's a great step. Oscar.
I agree. There's definitely a lot of learning opportunities in this video. And I'm glad the chief and the PD in general is looking into addressing the gaps in training that are evident in the video. I wanted to share a couple things that are thoughts that I had while watching the video. When I've done a few police ride-alongs, I learned, and I think even as part of this police commission, I learned that a lot of the issues, crime issues in the city are driven by a very small group of individuals. And because of that, the police department knows a lot of individuals because they either are the result or responding to calls that due to things that these individuals have done. And I just wanted to, so it's no different than I think when I go to the store and I see sort of the same individuals sort of hanging out, like I don't know them by name, but I just know, you know, there's individual X who is at the corner store, what have you. And because it's a lot of the same officers patrolling the same neighborhood, so long story short, officers know a lot of individuals that bring, you know, bad attention to themselves. The other thing too is when I did the force option training that I highly recommend to commissioners if they haven't done it yet, the scenario there actually was a gentleman. My scenario was a gentleman who had just broken up with his girlfriend and he was having a mental health crisis. I actually was very understanding in that situation. I felt really bad for him. And I ended up getting shot and failing the simulation. So, you know, there's multiple scenarios out there where things could have gone bad. I'm not, in this situation, I must admit that I don't think it was going to escalate to that extreme. But I think we need to be cognizant that history has shown us that events have escalated to very serious extremes for the officer as well. So I just want, and that's something that I learned from the force option training. That's why I keep highlighting that folks should take the training.
Other comments? Diego.
Yes, Chief. I definitely echo what Sheriff Brown has been commenting on this situation here. I'm looking at the video, but my question is this. The AVR video, I only see one of those videos. Now, the other officers, I'm sure they have the AVR on. have we seen all the other videos? I mean, I would like to see those because I've been getting a lot of comments.
Is it my connection, but I can't forget all.
Can you hear me?
You're very muffled, Diego. It's been a problem all evening.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what it is, but
I can hear him well.
I can hear him fine.
Go ahead.
Okay, so what I'm trying to say is that most of these videos that we're looking at right now, not just from the community, but also from the AVR, from the police officer, I'm trying to put all this together because I have some comments and questions regarding that. And I know that there's an investigation going on right now, but it looks like the district attorney somehow dropped all these charges, right? And if they have dropped all those charges, we need to be able to see all the other videos in order to be able to give a good recommendation on this one, because I'm assuming that a lot of people have questions. But my concern was that it wasn't just one person who got arrested. There was two other people, three in total who got arrested. And according to the comments that I've been seeing right now from people from the communities, that all three of them got either injured or beat up or somehow harassed by the police officers. And I would like to know more about that in order to give a good recommendation regarding that. But this, obviously, you know, if the officer would have took this as a personal threat, then I think it would have been de-escalated before then. Again, it was a matter of the community. However, I feel that the police officer could have just ignored a lot of those verbal comments and continued, like Chief Brown had mentioned, with his pursuit with the other guy in the car. So I would like to see, how can we get videos of the other arrests or detentions that was happening that day?
So I know if a complaint is made to you all that you guys get all the video and evidence to investigate. I'm not sure, Bruce, can you help me with if there isn't a complaint made to the CPRC, if that video is released or how that happens?
Ordinarily, it's in response to a complaint. The commission does have the authority under their new, under the amendments to the ordinance to ask for things to be investigated. This may fall under their purview to ask for an investigation, which would then trigger them getting the stuff. At this point, you know, there is the internal investigation. I believe OPA is investigating this incident, right?
Yes.
So, you know, so as part of that, I mean, we have to, I get the outrage that commissioners are feeling, but, you know, we do have procedures that we have to follow under state law that apply to the officer's rights. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's my long-winded way of trying to answer it.
And my follow-up question to that is this officer still on duty, or is he on leave? Is he suspended? What is his status right now?
No, he is working.
Okay.
Am I correct? Is this subject to a civil action? Did you say that also?
Yes.
Chief?
Yes.
So we are involved in open litigation.
Yes, we are.
Okay.
My last question, do we know, because I know that you mentioned he's been here 3 or 4 years, but I know that he's a Fairfield officer, if I'm not mistaken, a former Fairfield officer, right? Do we know his record there?
A former what officer?
Fairfield police officer?
Yeah, but Diego, even if we did know that, that's not something that we can mention in a public forum like this.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments? Am I way off base, or does the commission see the problem here?
Yes.
Okay, I don't particularly want to play the entirety of the next clip. It's 10 minutes long. Basically, what happens is another individual Well, you know, we may have to simply play the clip because part and parcel of my concern involves the fact that it looked like there were 15 cops, in essence, standing around in this community. And that, to some extent, all by itself failed to be a de-escalating factor. But the individual who ends up getting arrested gets arrested for walking from up the street back to the corner where all the cops are standing around. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that was his conduct. So again, it's an opportunity to de-escalate. And so, yeah, let's go ahead and play that clip. This one's a little longer. I'm sorry. I know that it's 10 o'clock. I'm sorry, folks. I think it's important enough that it needs to be done. So, Shawnee, play that second clip, please.
Have a speaker before Ben.
Okay, go ahead.
Ben?
Yeah, same thing. This individual, it's not biased when you know someone and what they've done. Okay, so you can't take that away. You can't take knowledge away of what you know about somebody. So let me put that out there first. And then the arrest is the arrest. They tell you to leave a scene. You know, most people are going to leave a scene and stop the investigation. But if you don't, you don't. And again, there's laws for that. And there's a reason we have those laws. And it's quite honestly, it's pretty stark. I mean, Mr. Brown, you didn't even know that the person tased is actually not the person he was trying to arrest. So I mean, you watch these one videos and you don't even know what you're talking about.
I did know that. I did know that. I did know that it was the brother.
This is the problem with this type of thing, is because you have one video, one format, one view, a small fisheye, and not all the information. And this is the problem. And so there's a whole myriad of information that's part of this whole thing, and it's not being viewed. So, you know, go ahead and do whatever, but you guys are really out of touch and off base here, and you're making judgments about something and you don't have the full picture, and that's a problem.
Other comments? Shawnee?
Okay, I will go for the video.
Thank you.
Hold on just a moment here. Let's see. Give me a second. Let's see. Sorry, guys. Hold on. Gotta find it. Sorry. Hold on. Okay. Here we go. Share screen.
Confirm. Confirm with the town.
That escalated.
Stupid. Let me go.
DJ, come out that tall one. DJ. Bro, no tripping. He out of pocket, bro. He out of pocket. That nigga out of pocket, bro. He out of pocket. Nigga, as a police officer, nigga, you're supposed to drag bitch ass shit. Fuck on with your bitch ass, nigga. He gonna get his, but I ain't gonna lie. He gonna get it from last episode, nigga. What is it, 148?
That man's done with, man.
Oh, you got your bitch ass slim, bitch.
Yeah, DJ, you want to
Hey, bitch. Tall ass bitch. That's why you got slammed.
Hey, get off the
bitch.
roadway, man. It's over.
Man, shut up, man. Don't talk to me.
Walk to-
Man, wait. Don't touch. You touch me, folks, bruh. Don't touch me,
Let's
bruh.
sit back
Fuck
up.
you. I'm on the curb, nigga. I'm on the curb, nigga. Fuck you talking about? Get me on the curb. I'm on the curb. I can be on the curb. Y'all can't tell me shit else. I don't want to hear your mouth at all.
We don't want to hear yours either.
Good.
But it's freedom of speech. He can say what he want to say. It's freedom of speech. He can say what he want to say. Stupid. Police are violent people.
What they even call the police for anyway?
No, nobody called the police. He was just driving by, and we were sitting in the car listening to some new song. That's what happened.
Where's they at?
And DJ, DJ don't fucking know to shut up. Why are you even talking to the police? Have nothing to do with you. Just shut the fuck up.
Nobody was even talking to him.
Damn, he got a problem with, I mean,
bitch actually.
But no, when somebody say be quiet, when somebody say be quiet, be quiet. Yeah, like why you argue? I'm sorry that happened to you.
No, you probably need not supposed to be out the car when you get searched, that's all. You get pulled over, you're not supposed to be out the car.
Hey, you good, man?
Well, nobody
Oh,
get
dirty
pulled
from
over
behind.
for no, but I'm saying like,
Hey.
just be quiet. Like,
Hey,
just
Susie.
fucking be
Yeah.
quiet. Huh?
Where's that plate off for that Infinity?
They gotta be the police car.
We'll get it on the camera. Hey, watch this dude in red. Someone might have hit him.
Oh, fuck.
Where's my boy? Which one? Which car is it? TV. DJ slammed that bitch ass on his head. Sorry, man. I know I got slammed on this no time.
Hey, man, you need to back the fuck up. You're not walking up.
He's on the sidewalk. Y'all can't touch that, man. Fuck y'all.
Let us get him some medical treatment, okay? That's what we're doing right now.
You're about to go too, man. Come over there. We're done. Me?
We on the sidewalk. We're not going nowhere.
What's left? Just AMR.
You always trying to tell people to do something that they ain't got to do, nigga.
Are you pictures?
The fuck you did that
Stop
shit last
talking.
time?
Stop talking.
I hate that shit, bro.
You can leave. I have nothing on me. Then you can leave. You gotta go inside, man. We're over. It's done, man. It's over, man. You gotta go inside, okay? Leave now.
That's our man. What you talking about?
Hey, she's grabbing him. Yeah.
Come on, come on, come on.
You touching my leg?
Yeah, come on. I'm touching you. Come on. Let's go. You don't need to put your name in the street or nothing. Let's go, man. This happened.
Bad.
Okay, you talk too much. It's always a
You too.
Leave. Fall forward. Fall forward.
You got a bitch ass dip, something like this. Fuck. Bitch.
Back to me. So I need Hodges and Susan with him. I'll chase him all the way around here. When you were 19,
let's just worry about us. You know what I'm saying? But listen. But listen, he ran up on the curb. He didn't come off the curb. He didn't threaten him.
Right,
Like,
he was being verbal.
yeah, but freedom of speech. If he's not threatening your life, you know what I'm saying? Sometimes I'm just saying. Sometimes boy, like that was so unnecessary. That shit went spiral out of like. like so damn fast. Like you didn't even know what happened. Like shit.
See, that day you need to go to jail.
Hey, you know what I mean? Shut up.
This dude walks back. Hey, for face mask violation. Is that what he's doing? All for F is what he's trying to fight. Keep walking back here. Okay. He goes to jail, 148.
See? You got clothes around.
Hey, y'all need to stay where you at.
I told you. I told you.
Leg under there. Just put him in the handcuffs and then. Yeah, put him in the
Do I go up there and get some shoes on?
We'll get him some shoes.
At this point,
Well, what's his relation to the person in the back?
Did you say stop sharing?
yeah, I said you can end it at this point. I think we've seen the relevant language, or the relevant parts of the video.
Okay, it's stopped, right? You guys are all back?
Yes, we're all back. Okay, again, an opportunity to de-escalate. The guy is standing there. He's not violent. He's not flailing. He's standing there. His lady friend has the good sense to pull him away. And then he comes back. And they're going to arrest him for PC 148, to resist, delay, or obstruct. And I'm sorry, I don't see resist, delay, or obstruct in this fellow's conduct. What I see is 15 cops standing around in this neighborhood while things get increasingly heated. I don't see de-escalation here. I see just the opposite. Other comments? If the chief is, and I take her at her word that there is a policy change coming up regarding de-escalation.
Something to say when
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I wanted to say something before you miss me, but I can wait till everyone's done.
Go right ahead.
Okay, so I think one of the observations that I made from watching the first video, and the chief can correct me if I'm wrong on this, I think we can take the officer that was moved out of the way. Was that the one that's been winning Officer of the Year for like 4 years in a row now?
You're talking about Brandon Hodges?
Hodges, uh-huh.
I don't believe it was Hodges. I saw Hodges in the first clip, but I believe it was another officer.
Okay. Okay. I was just, the reason why I was asking was because we could probably learn a lot from him. I mean, everybody else seemed to be so calm. And I mean, I don't know, you know, and this is probably directed to Ben. Like, I don't know, Ben, that if the argument that he feared for his life is correct, because then that means that all the other officers that were there fear for their life, you know, and the officer was moved out of the way. So there was still another officer in front of that officer that was in between him. So I don't know that I understand the fear for your life factor other than the verbal, I'm going to beat your F, whatever. And so,
they might not actually have not had their head in the game. Okay, so there's that. But I mean, you can't, the problem is, again, when you've only seen a couple of videos, you haven't seen them.
Según soy la vice president de la police commission in Richmond.
I'm sorry, there was a bit of crosstalk there. Well, Chief French has told us that de-escalation is going into the policy. Is there a move to eliminate entirely chokeholds, I know that the carotid restraint. Randy, I'm sorry, Randy, go ahead.
Yeah, I have two concerns
My
with the
connection's
second video.
getting wonky again.
No worry, my connection went off. I've been kicked out and put back in, so I missed a couple of things. So my concern with the second video is twofold. One is the amount of officers there in the first place. For a city that said we have such few officers, there was a lot of damn officers on that block. Two, my second thing is the officer that says you can get him for a mask violation when there is at least 10 people out there that did not have a mask on. I don't see how that looks good on any video or any conversation to where, like, the lady didn't have a mask. Why wasn't she put in handcuffs? The kids across the street were not masked. Why were they put in handcuffs? The dude that continued to yell and say stuff to the police officers throughout the whole second video, which I feel was worse than the first video, was screaming and yelling and throwing threats and cussing. He didn't have a mask on, and nobody told him that he was going to get arrested for having a mask. So my thing was that then he gets arrested, and then you tell me he got arrested for another charge. So this is where the distrust comes in. And this is where the community looks at something and says, how can I trust you when this is what you guys are doing? Yeah, this is the videos of what we see. Try to explain it to me of what we're missing that we're not seeing. Because this is the confusing part. People are telling me, oh, you don't have everything that you have. What am I missing? What are people missing that they're not seeing to see that that guy should have been in handcuffs when he was checking on somebody who was hurt and needed attention? Tell me, what did I miss that he was quiet and didn't say anything, yet there's somebody walking around actively yelling and cussing and nothing happened to him? What are we missing?
Randy, that guy came back 3 different times. Okay, so you're only seeing one time. The guy's drunk. I mean, it's in the officer's report. You'll see it eventually at one point or another. That guy's on the other side of the street, and once he got to the other side of the street, it was all good. And yeah, people talk crap to us a lot, but it depends on what you're saying and what your actions are. As for why there's so many cops, there's a lot of cops there because there was a code 3 cover call, because one thing led to another from the initial stop, and it turned into a big brouhaha. And at one point, those citizens closed the gate on the officer, and he was isolated. So the other officers couldn't get to the first officer, and they were stuck. And so they asked for all the officers in the city to respond. So it's a common thing I hear out on the street all the time is, why do we need so many cops? But there's a lot of people out there, and you don't know what people's intentions are. You're trying to contain this thing.
Right. And I think maybe that's my concern. Like, we assume that the intention was bad, because when I saw from and I think maybe that's where I'm at a loss at, is that we assume, like, the cops assume this is going to get worse. So let's bring everybody in there, which actually made it worse. Yeah, the guy was drunk, but he wasn't saying it. I felt that, and like I said, this is on me, and like I said, we can work. Like I said, I may be missing something, but that guy looked less of a threat than the person running around yelling and cussing and throwing epithets and saying, oh, he got dipped on his head and other things, than what this guy was walking around doing. And I felt like, and this is the escalate, hey, go home with your wife and we'll check on him. Like, those to me, that I think is the disconnect. And the hero officer, which I haven't heard addressed, tell him you can get him for his mask, when the cop is literally talking to somebody in the corner that doesn't have a mask on, and I don't see the cop saying anything about her not having a mask. So, and there's a police officer there, and there's a police officer that doesn't have a mask on either. So that's where I get lost.
But I think that's just sarcasm. That's just people talking. That's not, I mean, no one was
arrested. But when you're a
for
cop, sarcasm can't go that far. Like, that's not a joking matter. You're past joking. It's a serious situation.
That's the most appropriate thing. I get you. I'm not saying that's the most appropriate thing. I'm just saying the guy came back 3 different times. You just need one. And I get it. But, and also what the officers know about that particular individual, they may know something more that I don't know or you don't know. And that's part of the reports and part of what people explain. And that's what's missed when you just push one video out like that, because you're just trying to push one little segment forward and not the whole picture. When you guys have the whole picture, I mean, then you can make an assessment. But there's a lot more to it, moving parts.
Right, but and I think this is my pushback to you. Like me, especially in the Black community, where we be told that there's a whole picture and then the whole picture never comes out, and then we have to deal with that consequence. Like, you don't understand that that's systemic and that's historical. When we're told there's another side of the story, and then we get the other side of the story, it's actually worse. And that's where the disconnect is. Like, and I don't think that you really understand that part, and then that shit hurts. And like, when you see that, like, instead here we go again. And like, that ratchets it up stuff. And yeah, we would like to see it, but I don't know how to explain it, because like I live it, and like it's frustrating, and like it comes to the point. It's like, that's where the mistrust. Like, it's not like I just trust that police officer. Like, I know a lot of police officers, and they've all treated me with respect. I have no problem. But do I still get chills when I see a police officer around me doing something wrong? Yeah, because that's ingrained and it's systemic, and it's something that I've dealt with all my life. And that's something that I don't think people see. Yeah, you can see a video, but people see like, oh, that's nothing. Like, I've done even worse. I've done that. And that's where the mistake comes in. And like, when you say something like sarcasm, like, you guys are trained. Like, y'all got to be better than that. Like, him as a civilian, he needs to know better too. But at the same time, you guys are trained. You guys are putting, y'all paying a lot of money to do a certain thing. And I feel like and it was like, oh, that's sarcasm. You can't have sarcasm in that situation. Just like me in a hotel, I can't have sarcasm in a situation because I need to know better at my job. There's some things that I can't say as a joke, because then I'll get in trouble. And I think that's where the failure happens and the disconnect. And then that's where the trust grows. And that's where it's like, oh, he was just joking. And I'm like, well, that wasn't funny to me. And that could have messed up my safety. And that could turn into something even worse.
I would never try to take away from any of your experiences, nor I would hope anyone would try to take away mine. No, I get it. But I would never try to do that. However, these are human beings. We're not superheroes. We're not, it's not TV. And a lot of times that gets misconstrued. And again, I said the guy came 3 different times. And he wasn't hurt or anything like that. In fact, he was interrupting us getting medical attention to his buddy. And so, a lot of things have to be taken in consideration. And I understand, and I get and feel the emotion, but there's also, you have to kind of take the emotion as much as possible as you can out of it, and have a full sight picture of the whole thing. Because if not, you can't really, and I hope you guys do. I hope you guys look at the whole thing, because I think if you look at the whole thing, a lot more of it will make sense than just one little sliver. That's all.
David Brown, whenever I have a chance.
Go right ahead.
I would also like to make a comment.
I think Carol was before me, though.
All right.
Thanks, Annie. So I'm actually really kind of disappointed, Ben, that your response doesn't acknowledge not even a tiny bit, that maybe the police might have done something a little differently and it would have been better. Because I think it's pretty clear to everybody that those people were extremely upset because what had happened was not right. And they were saying, this is not right. This is not a good situation here. This is not the way we want to see the police acting. And maybe some of them were belligerent and rude, but it was across the board. All of the people that were civilians that were there were upset. So I think something happened there that was not right. And I think it would really help the community if we could look at it and say, okay, let's try to fix this problem. Let's try to see why things turned out the way they did, instead of just trying to sort of blatantly say, oh, you didn't see the whole situation.
Like I said, the comment about the mask, and I get it. Like, some of the things we say, yeah, I mean, should they be said? No, but we're not perfect, and I just said that. And do we do things wrong and make mistakes? Absolutely, which I just said, Carol. But take that and extrapolate it to the wire. Like, do we get it right every time? No, we don't. And are there things that could be improved? Absolutely. But this wholesale kind of like slam the book that, it was wrong from start to finish. Well, again, it's like, well, then what should we do? Should we never take any action whatsoever? And if that's what people want, then so be it. But there has to be some type of thing that addresses people's behavior and their actions, because we can only respond to what is going on. And if people are approaching us a certain way, what are we going to do? and there has to be some type of, a conversation about that as well. I'm more than willing to admit that police officers get it wrong and make mistakes. I make mistakes all the time on this job. It happens, but there has to be some type of balance to that. There has to be a balance where, like, I see nobody talking about any of the things that really the other, people's behavior in this whole situation. I look at lots of different things that are kind of issues on the side. Like, there's a lot of cops there. Well, there's a reason for that. And is that a bad reason? I don't know. It shouldn't be. I mean, there's a lot of cops that had to come. The guy came back 3 different times. You're not seeing that. You're only seeing one time. You don't know what those officers know about this particular individual. They have history. So there's that. And if people have, prior behaviors, that might actually affect what their current behavior is. I mean, that's something that people have to take into account. So we do get it wrong. And I'll be the first to tell you that cops make mistakes all the time. But we're not perfect. And that's real life. So I'm not saying that there's things we could have done better in the situation. I'm not saying that at all. I'll be the first to tell you there's definitely things we could do better. But something that I have a real problem with is that someone just a quick judgment, quick to pull the trigger on that this, officer is a bad officer and that he did everything wrong when, someone violated the law. And there's no one seems to care about that at all whatsoever. And then he was attacked as he was trying to arrest that guy. He was attacked by another person. Then he changed and tried to taser that guy, but no one seems to care about that. And so that conversation has to be had too. I mean, I'm more than willing, in our community, we have a great progressive community, and I'm more than willing to have those conversations, as are most officers and the chief. But there has to be a balance, and there has to be some responsibility for people too on what people's behaviors and actions are. And that has to be part of, again, it's a part of the whole picture if we're going to have these conversations, which I'm more than willing to have with anyone. And I know COVID's kind of screwed that up, but I know before it, Randy and I were going to meet and talk, but there's a lot of stuff that I think that happens in these issues and these incidents that really could be worked out a lot and would permit a better understanding where we're not just coming here and colliding off a video. And with respect to Randy's experiences and the experience of lots of Black people in this country, it's real and it's a problem. But the other thing too, we the police are required to, go out and protect people too. And it's a hard place for us to manage and be in if we can't do our job safely. So, and by safely, we're protecting some of the very same people who are worried their own selves about the police, and that it's a problem. So I don't have all the answers, but I think that a lot of it needs to be more conversationally based and not kind of like this, which is, to me, it's just kind of like a slam of the cops right off the top. It's not really fair, but that's just my opinion.
Kind of disagree with you.
Hang on one sec. Chief French has had her hand up, and then we'll go to Stephen Lacey. Unmute yourself, Bisa.
Hi, sorry about that. I just want to make a comment and then I'm actually going to jump off. I already had a midnight meeting last night and need to try to get some sleep before my meeting in the morning. But just going back to the investigation portion of it, I personally look at these things in 3 different ways. One, is this legal? Is this legal for the officer to do? Do we have some kind of crime here? I know somebody asked about if this officer is working, and no, we've already determined that this isn't a legal thing. There's nothing illegal that the officer did. 2, we'll look at if it's with the policy, and that's what we're looking at in our internal investigation. And then the 3rd thing that I always want to look at, whether it is in policy or it isn't in policy, I always want to look at, is this what I want my officers to do? So, do I want my officers to arrest everybody that says they're going to kick my butt? Do I want, so that's another thing that we'll look at in terms of that's outside of policy, is what we want our officers to do. And if the answer is no to that, then we'll look at some training and some other guidance that we can provide to our officers so that this doesn't happen again. So I just wanted to kind of go over how I kind of take these incidents and look at them and then move forward with them.
Thank you. Steve?
Okay, Ben. So what I was saying was I disagreed because you said that we basically formed an opinion without seeing all of the facts. Well, you kind of did the same thing when you're coming up to a scene, and because somebody had a previous issue with law enforcement, you kind of prejudge the situation walking into the door as well. So it sounds like we're both doing the same thing, and we need to bridge that gap. So it's not just one-sided. It's definitely not one-sided. So that's all I got to add.
I'm all for it.
Yes, well, based on everything that we've been seeing here, it's not that we're being biased, either us as Commission for the Community or Ben or Chief French for the police department. But we do have to acknowledge that there was a lot of wrongdoing here. First of all, the officer, just went by his personal ego and, confronted this guy because they told him something. Now, we also have to understand that, based on a lot of treatment that a lot of the community members have been going through from the police department, they're not taking it personal because for that officer there, but they are taking it as a department. So they are putting everyone in the same parameters per se. But I think in this situation, a police officer took an oath, and his job is to be able to, his or her job is to be able to say, you know what, I'm the professional here, and I cannot be led by someone else's anger to be able to take away from my responsibility as a police officer.
Bingo.
So things that happen this way as growing up, I remember a police officer coming to our school and say, you know what, just because someone tells you something, that doesn't mean it's true. And to be able to de-escalate the situation, ignore those situations. And being able, as a professional, a lot of this thing could have been de-escalated from the very first time when the guy said, I will kick your ass. From there, ignoring that, I'm sure that we wouldn't even have this conversation going on right now. So what I'm saying here is that no one is taking this as a biased standpoint. I'm sure Ben is not, and we are not either. But we all have to do our own responsibilities as commission and also president for the APOA. So I would say in this situation, we need to have more conversations like this, like Lacey said, to be able to bridge that gap and to be able to see what can we do to better our community, not to divide it.
Other comments? Okay, I see no response. I would.
Sorry, David. Sorry, David. I do want to say something.
Yeah.
Sorry, before we finish. So I there's a lot of talk of what the officer's done wrong, and I get that. I feel like there's some things definitely that could have been done differently, but I also want to acknowledge one particular officer that was there that actually did something that I do want to commend him for. I believe is Officer Guzman, the gentleman that was sitting in the back of the unmarked vehicle and on the second video. And he was just sitting there relaxed on the back of the car of the cruiser and was just talking to the folks. Like, I feel like that is an attitude that a lot of officers should have with community. Like, because tensions are high, tensions are really high. People are really upset. And he was just there like, hey, talking to them like, hey, relax, like, I know this guy. He even told an officer that was getting closer, and I believe it's the one that was there with the AVR, like, no, it's okay, I'm talking to him, go away. And he kind of like told him to go away. So I want to encourage more officers to really take upon themselves when they do see excessive force being used, or things that are wrong, to really say to their other fellow officers, like, hey, dude, relax, it's okay, we gotta, let me stick with him, you go over there. And I feel like if one of the officers there could have told this officer, like, dude, relax, he's just talking BS or whatever, let me go talk to him, I think things would be differently. And I really commend that officer. I really liked the behavior that he had during the time that this was all crazy. So I just wanted to say that, because yeah, there's things that can change, but there's also good things that our officers are doing. And we need to talk about those things too and say, well, look, here's this officer. This is what we would like
more officers to do. So I just wanted to bring that up before we stop the conversation. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, I don't know that there's any action that we need to take tonight. As I say, the chief has told us that there are some policy changes going in. We, as a commission, will have an opportunity to view those policy changes. But I agree that we need to have the conversation. We need for the police department to understand that for our job of improving relations between the community and the police, this kind of an incident pushes us back significantly. So I'll let it go at that. If there's nothing else, then let's move on to item 12, reports of subcommittees and staff. Who wants to start?
No report.
Don't all jump in at once.
No, I don't have anything to say.
Carol has no report. Stephen?
In regards to outreach, we'll be hosting another healing circle on the 12th of July. Everyone is welcome to come out and participate. I did mention it to Chief French before this call, so there will be some law enforcement out there working with us. So everybody come out, and that's it. That's all I have to add.
The details of that to Shawnee, and Shawnee, can you circulate the
Shawnee and she can circulate it around.
Yeah, that'd be good. All right. Let's see. Randy.
Nothing to report.
Yanni. Where'd she go? Yanni Garcia, any report? There she is.
I'm here. No, I think there was a conversation that some of the commissioners had, you know, when the planning was going on for the VML protest in Nichols Park about policy changes and ordinance changes that we see fit. I'm not a part of that committee because I don't remember that I am, but I do feel that this is a time for that committee, and I don't remember who's a part of that committee, to really take notes of everything that we've talked about, because the recommendations need to start happening. Like, we don't need to wait till the next month. The work can start happening, and make those ordinance changes and policy changes so that we can recommend them, and not wait till the next meeting to say, oh, this is what we'd like. No, let's start working on that now. So whoever's a part of that committee, I don't mind helping. I was a part of the outreach committee, but with COVID, there's really not much outreach that can be done. So I'm more than happy to, you know, join you guys in any way that I can. I don't remember who's part of that committee, but we should really get to work.
Thank you. Let's see, Diego. You're still muted. Okay, we'll skip Diego. Oscar Garcia.
Yeah, Diego said a while back that he had a meeting like 15 minutes ago or something, so he's probably logged off.
Oh, yes, he did. There was something in the chat.
Actually, he sent a text and he says he's on his iPhone. So I don't know if that makes any difference, but he just sent that a moment ago. A chat.
Any report, Oscar?
I don't have anything to report. Just echoing Commissioner Yanni Garcia's comment that we should, get the ball rolling on some of the feedback we've gotten from the community. So that's it for me.
Let's see. Shawnee, do you have anything to report?
No reports.
Bruce?
No, nothing for the commission.
Okay. If you would find a couple of minutes in your day to figure out if there's any sorts of training that we can update for the commission, perhaps on August 15th. That would be helpful. I think everybody has gotten the Brown Act training, have they not?
Yeah, I think I did that last year and then everybody was on the commission at that time.
Do
Okay.
we have to do it every year, or how often does that have to be done?
That's Brown Act is not required every year. That's your AB 1234 training that you have to do every year.
I recommend, if you're taking suggestions, Chair, some form of force option training. That to me was, very good in helping me with my work in the police commission.
Are you talking about for the retreat or just trying to get it scheduled?
For the retreat, yeah, it'd probably have to be videos or something like that, and not the real deal. The real deal is even better, but I don't know if that's even possible right now.
Yeah, I don't really see a video as a substitute. I agree with you about the value of it. Jerry, were you raising your hand? No.
Just going to mention that NACO put on a 1-hour training last month about investigations, and it was a pretty good one. I think there were 1 or 2 folks from the commission that participated in it, but it might be useful for the remainder of the commissioners.
And that's on a recorded video?
It was recorded.
Yeah, it's on the website. It would be up probably on the NACO.
Okay, very good. All right. Well, I'm exhausted. I had a report. I can't remember what it is right now, other than, well, I can't even remember that. So with that, I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn. Hearing such a motion and a second, I will deem it unanimously approved. Thank you very much. It's 10:38 p.m. on July 1st, and this concludes the meeting of the Citizens Police Review Commission of the City of Richmond. Good night.
Adjourned. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.